Hey everybody, welcome to the Phoenix Oracle podcast. This is session 3 and I'm Sue and this is Jules, and we are here today to share more spiritual chat with you. And today we are going to be discussing awakening and remembering and what we make of that, what our experiences are, what it's serving, why it's happening now more than ever on the planet, and how many more people are becoming consciously aware, which is awakening. So Jules, I'd like to ask you, what is your thoughts on what awakening and remembering is, and what do you feel the divine purpose of that is?
Okay, so I think the awakening is the awakening of the eye, the third eye. It's an awakening of some kind, and the remembering is coming back to your soul, remembering your soul purpose. So I think with an awakening, it is where we drop away from our conditioned experiences, the roles we play that we've been told to play. I think an awakening is where we wake up basically from the conditioned patterns, behaviours that we've been surrounded by birth, basically, because we're conditioned from the moment we're born. And it really is then an awakening of our senses, an awakening of ourself, our true authentic self. So the remembering part is we are here on this earth plane to remember our true selves, the remembering of love, the remembering of the unity of the divine planet that we're on, and that we are interconnected to this web of life, as I call it. So the purpose is, I believe that the purpose takes us to our becoming. So the purpose is to recognize where this life takes us, and ultimately it's about returning to source. For me personally, everybody's outlooks are different, but I think the purpose of it all is it's an experience. It's the lessons that we signed up to experience. And I think the purpose ultimately is to evolve. What do you think?
Yes, I agree. I think the purpose is to evolve. I think awakening and remembering are two of the same yet different things. I think awakening can be fated and destined different points in your life, where there's certain trigger points, certain events that are perfectly aligned to help you spontaneously become more conscious, which is essentially becoming more aware. So where we might have a vision of the world this wide, it becomes a lot greater. Our perspective, our higher self, our view, our bird's eye view of everything becomes much wider, which means that the meaning of everything has a very different meaning. Awakenings can be explosive, they can be tough, they can be enlightening, they can be beautiful, they can be traumatic. An awakening cannot be prevented once it starts. So it can be a traumatic event that spontaneously starts the awakening, or it can be a fated time that is going to happen at that point anyway, because whatever your soul journey is, your experiences, it is a very specific point on your timeline of your life where suddenly things start to make more sense, where you suddenly can look back on your past and see it from different lenses that may be tough, but eventually it's a more healing way of seeing what you've been through, so you can let it go. It might be that your world view changes, your life view changes, your relationship with yourself changes. And when we start to remember, we're remembering our soul blueprint, we're remembering what we already know deep down inside. So it's already encrypted, encoded within us. We have certain timelines and points where those naturally wake up. And the part of that where it can get quite hard is the human part, because suddenly what we thought was isn't. And this can come down to the crux of such deep issues of our identity. The most beautiful existential question we can all ask is, who am I? What is my purpose? And that is what awakening is. That's what remembering is. We get closer to aligning with what that knowing is. But of course, all our conditioning, all our belief systems that have heavily laden on us, will completely blindside us to what our true being is. So awakening serve a very important purpose. They help us bring us back to who we were before our life happened, who we were before we got conditioned, who we were before our trauma hit, who we were before we thought that we had to be the same as everybody else and lose our true self, our authentic self. And the purpose of it is liberation. The purpose of it is to free yourself to be who you are, because then when you get into your true self, you're your happiest self, and then there will usually be a part of that true self that is aligned with making a difference. Look at humanity, look at the world. We all have a part to play. Deep down, we know that, and remember, an awakening is getting closer to being able to realise what that is and who we really are, and what a beautiful journey it is. And that's the purpose.
Absolutely. And I think it's about as well it's not about learning things, it is about remembering. So, we're born here on the earth plane, and it is about remembering. So, we are having to learn it, but ultimately, like Sue said, it sits in our blueprint, it sits in our blood, in ourselves. So literally, it's about bringing back those teachings, and that could be remembering that we are a part of the divine collective. It's about remembering that we are love. Ultimately, it's about to returning back to that light and love from which we come. We are eternal beings. So, this, what we're experiencing now, is literally just a chapter of a book, isn't it? So what triggered your awakening, would you say?
Which one?
Well, you pick one, maybe two, I don't know.
I mean, I'm not clear off the top of my head how many awakenings I've had. Not huge numbers, but the ones that I have had have been so deep and so profound that essentially I was never the same version again afterwards, and that is the point. What was the question?
What triggered your awakening? Yeah, what triggered your awakening?
Yeah,
start remembering.
Remembering. I need to remember. I need to remember this moment. I've had some catastrophic griefs in my life, losses in different ways, and that was so piercing. It was almost beyond what I could humanly bear, and it was that pushing through that pain barrier, which was beyond what I felt I could bear, but I still looked it right in the eye and walked into it willingly. It was those types of levels of pain and suffering, which are very much linked with dark nights of the soul, that went on for years each time, that were the catalyst for my awakenings. However, I was very good at self-sabotaging in those times, and very resistant, and very angry, and very, very consumed in my pain, consumed in my ego of how things should be rather than how things were, that prolonged these awakenings until the pain, the suffering, which is the key of all awakenings, became so unbearable. I had no choice but to let go. And when I let go, suddenly I start to wake up. I'm becoming more aware. I start to realise there was a gift in the healing, there was a gift in the pain, there was a gift in the crisis, because it led to spiritual crisis. I feel like I'm meant to be living that life, but I'm living this life. And marrying all that up together was very confusing, but in the confusion of the not knowing was where there was deep growth. So hell, really. Hell, but it doesn't always have to be like that.
No, it doesn't. Absolutely not. But I think some people think that an awakening is really blissful. It's not. It's an awakening generally. We can have awakenings through joy as well. It's it doesn't have to be all dark nights of the souls. But I think generally awakenings are triggered when we are going through traumas. For me personally, what triggered my awakenings is like I've said in previous podcasts, suffering with a physical pain, which has led to addictions, which I've had to overcome. And also, I think, being in a very traumatic, violent, mental and physical abusive relationship, that also was part of my awakening, and also recognizing what those teachings have brought to me. And ultimately now, I truly believe that we experience these traumas and traumatic events as a part of our becoming, because without having those certain experiences, we wouldn't be who we are now, would we?
No.
So that, but there was a collective of things that triggered my awakening. Some you will recognize, some you won't recognize, and it really did draw me deep into my spirituality, into my faith, and but to come out the other side of that, it's been phenomenal, because I've gone from a world of living in a lot of anxiety, a lot of depressions and addictions and things, to living a life of peace, abundance and love, which coming out the other side is what I'm now personally experiencing. Yes, you're still going to get trauma, you're still going to get triggers, you're still going to have that human experience, and in that moment, I have more knowing of how to deal with things. So this is where we evolve, and together, to be united together as a collective. This is where the personal power becomes a collective power. It's and this is where this great awakening is now. It's all in all these awakenings in order to us all to evolve, and it's changing the world.
Yeah, and there are many collective awakenings happening. People are being called to wake up now. Some are conscious of that, some aren't, but it's happening anyway. And awakening is levels of consciousness. Levels of consciousness is levels of self-awareness. And when we become more self-aware of ourselves, who we are, what we've been through, what it means, and we're not avoiding it, we're not denying it, we're not squashing it down with addictions and everything that we do because it's too unbearable or we're not ready for it. When we actually look it right in the eye, what happens is our levels of consciousness come up, which is awakening and remembering. So when we do the journey of the study of ourselves, so
shadow work, it's the shadow work, isn't it, ultimately?
Yeah, shadow work. When you do that work and you study yourself, the life that you've lived, you become more awake, and actually that has a ripple effect on everybody else. It has a knock-on effect. It's like it's electric. It's something.
It's just frequency, isn't it? It's like as I've healed myself, I know it's helped. It's helped others around me heal themselves too. And it's so it can be a beautiful thing when we are healing ourselves, because I often say to clients, the first port of call, if you can't do it for yourself, do it for your loved ones, because that helps kind of shift the energy a little bit, doesn't it?
Once one person heals and wakes up, it will impact those around them.
Absolutely.
Why do you feel that people are waking up now? Why now?
I think it's because we purposely are awakening now, because it's about evolution, really. I think because we're having to heal through this time, this timeline, because ultimately it's to serve the higher source and also ourselves as well, and the planet as well. I mean, it's a collective of many things, I believe, this awakening, and it's kind of like, they say it's, this new age coming in, but I believe that it's all mapped out anyway. That's what I truly believe. So I think it's happening now because it's needed now than ever before, and it's not just, like I say, it's not an individual thing, it's a collective awakening, which, to bring in higher frequencies, and it's also to redevelop and to also cast out like certain controls, certain beliefs, certain, but ultimately it's to bring everybody back together, because we're living it quite separately. So I believe, my personal belief is the awakening is to bring back that remembrance of where we are all from. We are all one. That's what I truly believe. We are all one. So I think that awakening for me, why it's happening now, it's to kind of evolve from separation into the collective field. What do you think?
Well, yeah, I agree with quite a lot of that. I do believe a lot of it is fated. If you look at prophets, mystics, seers from the past, this is very significant time. My strong belief is that we are incredibly lucky to be incarnated on this planet right now. Even though if you look around the globe, you think, why on earth do you think that's so? Well, my belief is that because our souls serves a couple of purposes. The reason that we come down here to be awake right now at this time on the planet is because it's crucial. This is fundamental, the crux of when, you know, this sinking ship can start to swim again, and that we are all coming down for two purposes. One, to play our part by, when we're our true authentic self, we bring our own personal vibration to the planet. The planet can turn around, but also there are millions and millions and millions of souls up there absolutely dying to get down onto planet Earth, Gaia, right now, because this is such an important time for accelerated karmic shifts, working through your stuff as quick as possible through the Earth School boot camp that can feel very painful. It's a very deep training ground on this planet. So if we're here now, although we might think, I don't really want to be here, and where's home and all the rest of it, we're actually here to play our part and also to liberate ourselves from a lot of trauma, collective trauma, global trauma, past life trauma that's now. This is very significant because, you know, the world is changing, the evolution is changing, our mindsets are changing, and it always has to get worse before it gets better. But hey, this was fated anyway. Our personal responsibility in our awakenings is to honor thyself first and foremost, work through our stuff, and then we are going to make such a difference on the planet. So it's so important. And you know, a lot of people out there are scared of this awakening, or they don't know what it means, or they think that they're still in slumber. But the fact is, if you're even finding yourself on this podcast today, if you're even questioning what awakening is, you're already on that path.
Absolutely you are. And I truly believe that, you know, this is where we need to step up a little bit, not as leaders but as teachers, to, you know, to bring these experiences and what these energies represent. Because, you know, like you say, it, you know, not everybody is in that awakening state, are they? So some people aren't able to awaken to some degree, are they? So, you know, it is working towards now the, you know, the spiritual people that are awakening, and ultimately it's to save the planet, to save the human kind of energy and that aspect of life, isn't it? You know, as well. So
save yourself.
Save yourself, absolutely.
Self-accountability.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, it's quite deep.
It is really deep, isn't it? So how did you see yourself before all of this then? How did you see yourself?
You really want me to air that here?
Maybe not, maybe a little bit.
Well, it's all about truth, isn't it? So I think I'm still working on that relationship with my former self. Probably the shadow part I wanted to hide, but it, you know, gloves off and everything. My former version of myself, if I can be more compassionate to that version, it's more in my masculine energy, far more in my masculine energy, in my ego, in my anger, in my victim mentality, in why is this happening to me? Didn't grasp it was happening for me and wouldn't have been ready for that back then. So there's a big journey there, and I'm actually still gently out shedding her. She's still in there, and you know, she's got my back. But how did I see myself? Frustrated. I always knew that there was a part here to play. I always felt driven since a child that I'm here for a reason. Frustrated that I couldn't grasp what that was, and I didn't feel I had the support to be what that was. Thinking, how do I get there when I've got all this mess to clean up and get through? I am still a work in progress on a better relationship with her. So my past as well is addiction since childhood and many other things. I'll write a book on that. I think that was the point.
That's on my list as well. When I get together, we will.
But if it wasn't for that version of my former self, I also wouldn't be here now, because she was a real warrior spirit. She was a real fire, and she got me where I am now. So, you know, I've come more into my feminine self, and that's nothing to do with the fact that I'm female. It's something else. We can do that on another podcast.
Yeah, that would actually make a good
That would make a very good podcast. How to stop being a man, being a woman.
Masculine and feminine energies, absolutely. Yes. But then myself, I've always had to live in my, I call it warrior energy, my masculine energy, because, you know, I think, you know, when you're going through your traumas and your dark nights of your soul, you know, you do need to link with that masculine energy, because that masculine energy projects you forward. So I like to call it warrior energy, you know, in myself, because I would probably look at myself before as the wounded soldier, I would say. Yeah. If I link back with my self before my awakening, yeah, the wounded soldier, I would say, you know, carried a lot of hurt, but not in a purpose of even towards herself, if we're going to look at it like that. You know, I carried a lot of hurt of others, you know, and it's recognizing then that you're carrying energies that don't even belong to you. So if I look back at my previous self, I feel quite sad in a way, because, you know, that person, you know, needed loving or needed help, you know, herself. So yeah, that's how I brand myself, as the wounded soldier. I can always remember that when I departed from a very mental relationship, somebody actually told my dad at the time that, you know, it's likely that Julie will, you know, will find somebody with kind of demons similar, or if not worse, because she's the type of person that feels she's a crutch for somebody to lean on. And I've never forgotten that advice that somebody gave to my father, because, and now I suppose, you know, we would call it the empathist, wouldn't we, or the, you know, the person that feels that they need to heal everybody.
Rescue.
And in that moment, you're breaking yourself, aren't you? So, but looking back now, I love that person, and I nurture that part of me. And but yeah, again, without the that broken version of me, then I wouldn't be here now. So you know, and yet again, it's you know, not just linking with the masculine energy, but it's also for the love of your loved ones as well. So that's something that's grown deep, where, you know, I've not done it for myself to start with. I've done it for others, but now I do it for myself, because this is the key. You know, we have to bring it back to ourselves, to nurture ourselves, to love ourselves, but we can do that. The healers, you know, the three biggest healers for me, you know, is the acceptance, forgiveness, unconditional love. We work through compassion, but we will take that on another. So
I think there's a really important point there, though. Part of that journey you went on as the empath, and having to work through giving too much and not necessarily for yourself, is a very...
I still do it now to a degree.
Yeah,
you know, we do, because
that's
part of us. You know, that's who we are, I suppose.
But I think it's a very normal part of the spiritual journey of empaths, light workers, highly sensitive people, therapists, compassionate people. They have to go through certain initiations to learn spiritual boundaries, which is usually we're overly empathic, we're rescuers, we're fixers, we feel other people's pain more than we check in with our own. We make sure they're okay more than we do with us, because we're so deep, we're so open. It's how, you know, the universe wants us to learn how to harness that and actually protect ourselves. So we give, but we also receive. We don't overgive to our detriment. We usually have to go through a bit of a hellhole to actually then, oh, that was the lesson.
And to truly kind of it is about falling in love with yourself, isn't it? And that's not from an egotistic view, that's from an open heart space view, isn't it? Because you know, a lot of my traumas, you know, I carried a lot of energy in the heart space. So some people might carry their energies in the solar plexus. Well, I did that a bit too as well. But you know, ultimately, it's about reopening up the heart space, because when we go through certain traumas and, you know, and things like that, and a lot of heart, you know, our heart space closes down. So it's about reopening up the heart space and returning back to love. So ultimately, you know, love, unconditional love, is the highest frequency of all. So we talk about frequency on another one as well. That's just been channeled in as well.
Yeah.
So do you have any perceptions on how you shifted? Do you have a perception on the way you shifted?
Yes. Following on from you talking about blocked hearts, I had no idea how blocked my heart was, hence me being in a different energy 2/3 of the first part of my life than now. So since my heart has started opening a lot more, suddenly how I see everything is different, because I'm coming away from the mind and I'm coming more from the heart and soul, which is a completely different vision. And I think with my perspective change, what I believe everything is, the point of everything starts to change. And the latest one that's come to me, that I share with a lot of people I work with, is nothing's personal. Everything feels like it's personal, but it's actually not. So when we're in the ego, we're still in our trauma, our survival, our fight or flight. We're still unhealed. We're still not feeling good enough, unworthy. Everything is super personal. We're super defensive. We're super reactive. We're super angry, and we have closed this off. So we've only got this vision of stuff, which is devoid of the emotion and the compassion that we need to be able to see things from a bigger perspective, because that's what sets you free. So it's true what they say, the truth might hurt first, but if you can endure it, it will set you free. So nothing is personal. So when people are abusive to us, horrible to us, mean to us, reject us, abandon us, hate us, whatever it is us, it's not actually us, that's their rejection.
It is. A lot of it is a reflection of themselves, isn't it? So, but yeah, I totally agree with that, 100%. It's
we don't have to accept it.
We don't, absolutely.
There might be times where there is an element of truth, but we can be humble enough to walk away and go, I'm going to have a look at that.
Yeah.
You know, it's when we can't hear anything as a problem because we're too defensive, or when we're just spewing out at people because we're angry. It's not really about them, it's about our stuff. So nothing is actually personal, and then that means we don't have the same heart pain, suffering, wounds that we carry. That isn't to undermine people who've been through hell, I get it, but it's when we do the deep level of work, do we really want to carry that pain with us forever, or do we want to learn to release it? What were those 3 things that you said? Compassion, acceptance, forgiveness, and unconditional love. So when we can view the world through that, which we often have to be quite healed to be able to feel that unconditional love and compassion, and to ourselves, when we can get to that, suddenly nothing's personal. But until then,
we do have to take accountability though as well, that, you know, when we're, you know, in certain relationships and everything else, because, you know, we're not perfect, you know, and you know, we are having that human experience, but generally it is about not taking things personally, because, you know, sometimes, like, you know, when we're in wounded versions of ourselves, we take things personally, and it isn't even about us, is it? You know, and we think it is, but that's part of the healing journey as well, you know. And then when we evolve then, and, you know, we come out the other kind of side of each awakening, then, you know, we learn techniques, which we can have another podcast on that as well, about learning techniques, how to not react, like, such as, you know, give ourselves like space, you know, when certain things are being projected at us, you know, and when we're linking in with our authentic self, you know, we start to rewire almost our thought process and how we think. You know, I find things really intriguing these days. You know, somebody might say something to me and I'll be like, and I'm thinking to myself, oh, that's very interesting, you know, and so that's very interesting. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, 100%. So do you feel there's any misconceptions of awakening?
Probably loads. Probably. I think where spirituality as a whole, but particularly with awakening, can become a problem is the level of judgment that can come into it. So
massive.
You know, when people say, oh, they're not awake or they're asleep, there could be an element of who are we to say that if we're saying it from a judgmental, because everybody is where they should be. And if we are this awake, at some point we too would have had to have been that awake. So if we're viewing people as only that awake, actually be compassionate to them, because they still have to do all that work to get to the level that maybe we've got to. But it's how long is a piece of string. There is no right or wrong. We are all on the same journey in our different ways, and we are all different ages of soul levels, soul growth, and there can be misconceptions where I've often heard in the spiritual community, I don't know about you, but these people are so asleep, and it's like, well, what are we actually meaning by that? So maybe they haven't had the time to do the level of self-awareness. Maybe they're scared to. Maybe they don't know what that is. Maybe they don't know how. But that does concern me slightly, where there could be judgment. And I'm not completely polished. I've been a judgmental person at different times in my life. Sometimes I've been aware, sometimes I haven't. I'm still a work in progress. So it could almost sound that I'm judging the judges, but it's just something that I observe that makes me think.
But there is a lot of judgment, though. There is a lot of judgment out there, isn't it? I mean, I personally worked with judgment for 2 years. So as a part of my own journey and awakening, I worked with certain emotions, and I worked with grief and all the emotions, but I particularly worked with judgment for 2 years, and I analysed how judgment works, and how people judge, and ultimately it's it's about not judging others until you judge yourself, but it's but yeah, absolutely. I think the misconception of awakening for me, is certain religions bring a lot of misconception, conditioned behaviours bring misconception, even to the point of old roles, old identities, it all comes into that misconception. It can even be kind of like I say, when I say conditioned, what we've been brought up to believe, isn't it? It brings a lot of misconception, but I think ultimately it's about our own personal journey, and what kind of awakening or spirituality is to us, isn't it? But for me, again, with the judgment, I don't judge any religion. I don't judge any kind of I don't judge in that way, because there is a lot of people that do in awakening, and I just feel that we're all here on a personal journey that does lead us into a collective one. But
it can create a huge divide, where actually there's so many divisions out in the world. It's really important to understand, where are we creating a divide, where actually the point is of awakening is to come together in some way, connect with, regardless who you are, what level you are, where you're at, what have you. And I think as well, when you look at the beauty of all these different things, I can take a snippet from each religion and each spiritual belief and go, I can take that, I can take that, I can take that. It's quite nice to be fluid and just flow.
Yeah, so for me personally, and I have cut across a few faiths along the way, and but for me personally, this is my personal belief. Whether you believe in Christianity or Catholic or Hinduism, Buddhism, whatever it is, for me personally, the divine source is the collective. So I have, and I do take aspects from one certain religion and another religion, and and it just becomes a part of me. So for me, that is what they call the collective, and the word divine source means unconditional love. So I feel that I'm working in unconditional love through divine source. That's how I see it. But what advice would you give to somebody then on their awakening?
Indeed. I think the first thing that I can feel rather than think is you're not alone. And although awakening can seem daunting and confusing and challenging and scary sometimes, that is exactly where you're meant to be at that moment. And that, remember, we are all going through it at this point, and there will be a tribe somewhere. There will be connectedness somewhere, even just things like this podcast and many other different types of podcasts by many other different people. Find people, join communities, reach out, do your journaling, do your meditation, do your mindful walks, do whatever brings you peace, knowing that you are safe.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That absolutely, it's about finding spaces, like healthy spaces where you feel held, you feel safe, because that's all a part of an awakening. Because you will find that certain relationships, you know, it could be friendships, you know, whatever relationships will leave your life when you're in the midst of your awakening. But I always say that what's happening is the divine source, however you put it, you know, is removing certain energies, situations out of your life in order for you to then find the tribe that, you know, it opens the door, opens the space for you to bring in their like-minded souls. So absolutely, like, you know, I would have loved to have had a community that I'm now in, you know, when I was in my awakening, because it can feel bloody lonely, you know, and you do feel really quite lonesome, don't you, through awakening. So, you know, I would always say, you know, try to find that community and we've got such an amazing community, you know, and it isn't just about this space or this podcast, like you said, you know, we are very, very lucky, because now that we have got this awakening, you know, there are avenues, there are beautiful spaces and communities that help each other grow and heal. So definitely finding community spaces, you know, but also working with your own personal journey. You know, everything is a strategy of daily practice. So during your awakening, you know, finding what works for you, whether it's meditation, whether it's reading, you know, whether, like say, journaling, you know, affirmations, work with what works for you. Not everything is gonna work for you, so link with things that do, drop the things that don't, connect with the people that are of higher vibrational frequencies, because they're the people that's going to be able to you know, help higher your vibrational frequency. Everything to me is vibrational frequency. So absolutely be kind to yourself, love yourself, give yourself compassion, and make sure you're grounded. Use Mother Earth, the nature, because that is an awesome way to help through your awakening, is the planet that we are walking on with our Mother Gaia.
So we are blessed, and it was wonderful to share this podcast with you, everybody. There will be plenty more, so you to follow us and subscribe.
Please do.
And we will see you again soon. Take care, everybody.
Bye bye.